In 330 BC, the largest empire the world had ever seen, an empire of 50 million souls, an empire that had stood for over 200 years, collapsed in just 3 years. One young king, 30,000 soldiers, and a dynasty that ruled from Egypt to India, erased forever. But here's the part they don't teach you in school. The Persian Empire didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because of the very system that made it great. This is Cluster Story, where we take a deep dive into history to get a great understanding of how we got here. If you made it this far, hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell, like, and share this video. Picture this. It's 500 BC. While Rome is just a tiny city-state fighting its neighbors, while Athens is experimenting with something called democracy, there exists an empire so vast that a messenger on horseback would need 3 months to travel from one end to the other. The Persian Empire. From the shores of the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the frozen steppes of Central Asia to the burning sands of Egypt. 23 different nations, dozens of languages, countless religions, all unified under one king, the King of Kings. But how? How do you control 50 million people spread across 3 continents in an age before telephones, before railways, before the internet? How do you collect taxes from a merchant in Babylon and a farmer in Egypt at the same time? How do you prevent 23 nations from simply walking away? The answer is a system so ingenious, so sophisticated, that historians are still studying it today. A system that created the template for every great empire that followed. This is the story of how the Persian Empire actually worked, and why that very system contained the seeds of its own destruction. To understand the Persian Empire, we must first understand the man who created it, Cyrus the Great. In 559 BC, Cyrus inherited a small kingdom called Persia. It was a vassal state, a servant kingdom, paying tribute to the mighty Median Empire. The Persians were considered mountain barbarians, rough, uncivilized, irrelevant. Within 20 years, Cyrus would conquer the known world. First, he turned against his overlords, the Medes. In a stunning reversal, the servant became the master. Then he marched west, crushing the legendary kingdom of Lydia and capturing its fabulously wealthy king, Croesus. Then east, subduing the fierce tribes of Central Asia. And then, Babylon. Babylon was the greatest city on earth. Walls so thick that chariots could race on top of them. The Hanging Gardens, the Ishtar Gate gleaming with blue tiles. Impregnable, unconquerable. Cyrus conquered it in a single night. According to ancient accounts, his engineers diverted the Euphrates River, allowing Persian soldiers to march into the city through the dry riverbed, under the walls, while the Babylonians celebrated a festival, unaware that their empire was ending. But here's what made Cyrus different from every conqueror before him. He didn't burn Babylon. He didn't slaughter its people. He didn't tear down its temples. Instead, he did something revolutionary. He walked into the temple of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, and proclaimed himself the chosen one of Marduk. He released the Jews from their Babylonian captivity, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He issued what some historians call the first Declaration of Human Rights, promising to respect the customs and religions of all his subjects. Cyrus understood something that previous conquerors had not. You cannot rule an empire by fear alone. You rule it by making the conquered feel that they have something to gain. This philosophy would become the foundation of Persian imperial policy, and it would create a system unlike anything the world had seen. After Cyrus came Darius I, and it was Darius who transformed a collection of conquests into a true empire. His innovation? The satrap system. Darius divided his vast empire into 20 provinces, called satrapies. Each satrapy was ruled by a satrap, a governor appointed by the king himself. These satraps were incredibly powerful. They collected taxes, they raised armies, they dispensed justice. In their provinces, they were practically kings themselves. But Darius was no fool. He understood the danger of giving so much power to subordinates. So he created a system of checks and balances that would make the American founding fathers proud. Each satrapy had not one, but 3 officials. The satrap handled civil administration. A separate military commander controlled the army, answering directly to the king. And a royal secretary kept records and reported also directly to the king. No single person had complete control. Each watched the others. But that wasn't all. Darius created a network of royal inspectors. The Greeks called them the eyes and ears of the king. These inspectors traveled the empire unannounced, checking on the satraps, investigating complaints, ensuring loyalty. They had the power to override local decisions. They answered only to the king. Imagine you're a satrap in distant Egypt. You're thinking about keeping some extra tax money. You're thinking about, maybe, just maybe, declaring independence. And then a stranger arrives at your door. He shows you a seal bearing the king's insignia. He knows everything, your troop numbers, your treasury balance. That secret meeting you had last month, the King of Kings sees all. This combination of delegated authority and centralized oversight was revolutionary. It allowed the empire to function efficiently across vast distances while preventing any single official from becoming too powerful. But the satraps were only part of the system. How do you control an empire that spans 3 months of travel? You build roads. The royal road stretched 2,700 kilometers from Susa, the administrative capital, to Sardis near the Aegean coast. It was the ancient world's first superhighway. Stations were placed at regular intervals, about a day's journey apart. Each station had fresh horses, supplies, and shelter. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote, "There is nothing mortal that is faster than these messengers." A message could travel the entire length of the royal road in just 9 days. 9 days for a journey that would take a regular traveler 3 months. But the road wasn't just for messages. It was the circulatory system of the empire. Armies marched along it. Tax shipments flowed through it. Merchants traded beside it. Ideas spread across it. And it was protected. Way stations were fortified. Garrisons were positioned along the route. Bandits who threatened the road faced the full wrath of the imperial army. The royal road allowed Darius to project power across unimaginable distances. A rebellion in Egypt? The king in Susa would know within weeks. Reinforcements would be on their way within days. But roads weren't the only infrastructure that held the empire together. Let's talk about money. Before Darius, most of the ancient world operated on barter or unstandardized metal weights. Darius introduced the gold daric, one of history's first standardized coins. Its purity was guaranteed by the king's seal. Suddenly, a merchant in Babylon could trade with a merchant in Lydia without negotiating the value of different silver chunks. The daric became the trusted currency of international trade. Even the Greeks, who despised the Persians, eagerly accepted darics. But the genius of Persian economics went beyond coinage. The empire's tax system was remarkably sophisticated. Each satrapy was assessed a fixed annual tribute based on its wealth and resources. Egypt paid in gold and grain. India paid in gold dust. Central Asian provinces paid in horses and precious stones. The amounts were significant, but not crippling. The Persians understood that an overtaxed province was a rebellious province. They wanted their subjects prosperous, and therefore obedient. This wealth flowed to the imperial capitals: Susa, Persepolis, Ecbatana, Babylon. And at Persepolis, Darius built a monument to his empire's glory. Imagine approaching Persepolis. You climb the great staircase, 111 steps carved into the mountain. Above you rises a platform of stone, massive and perfect. On this platform stands a city of palaces, a forest of columns reaching toward heaven. You pass through the gate of all nations, flanked by colossal winged bulls with human heads. Their eyes seem to follow you. Their carved beards curl in eternal perfection. Inside, you see the Apadana, the great audience hall. 72 columns, each 19 meters tall, holding up a cedar roof. The walls blaze with color, painted reliefs showing tribute bearers from every corner of the empire. Here comes the Armenian with his horse. There walks the Babylonian with bolts of purple cloth. The Indian carries gold dust. The African leads a giraffe. 23 nations rendered in stone, bringing their wealth to the King of Kings. This is not just a palace. This is propaganda in architecture. Every visiting dignitary, every foreign ambassador, every provincial governor who climbed those stairs received the same message. You are part of something greater than yourself. You belong to an empire that encompasses the world. Persepolis was the ceremonial heart of the empire. Here, on the Persian New Year, the king received tribute from all nations. Here, the empire performed itself. And yet, for all its grandeur, Persepolis was only one capital among many. The Persian Empire did not try to make everyone Persian. This was its genius, and ultimately, its weakness. Unlike later empires that would impose a single language, a single religion, a single culture, the Persians allowed remarkable diversity. The Jews worshipped Yahweh, the Egyptians worshipped their animal-headed gods. The Babylonians maintained their temples to Marduk. Official documents were issued in multiple languages. The famous Behistun inscription, where Darius recorded his victories, was carved in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Local laws remained in force. Egyptian judges applied Egyptian law. Babylonian judges applied Babylonian law. The empire didn't care how you lived, as long as you paid your taxes and answered the call when the king raised an army. This tolerance was practical, not ideological. Rebellion costs money. Oppression breeds resistance. By letting conquered peoples keep their identities, the Persians bought loyalty cheaply, and yet, there was a cost to this tolerance. The empire never developed a unified identity. There was no Persian culture that spread across the provinces. There was no common language that everyone spoke. There was no shared religion that bound the empire together. The empire was held together by 2 things: the competence of its administration and the person of the king. Remove either one, and the whole structure could collapse. No empire survives without an army. At the heart of the Persian military stood the Immortals. 10,000 of the empire's finest warriors, so named because their number never diminished. When one fell, another immediately took his place. To their enemies, it seemed the unit could not be killed. The Immortals were the king's bodyguard and the empire's shock troops. They wore elaborate robes, carried golden pomegranates on their spear butts, and were fed from the king's own table. They were professionals in an age of amateur soldiers, but the Immortals were just the core. When the king called for war, he could summon a truly massive army. Every satrapy was required to provide troops. Medes brought cavalry, Egyptians brought archers, Indians brought war elephants. The famous army of Xerxes that invaded Greece may have numbered 200,000 men, drawn from every corner of the empire. This diversity was both strength and weakness. Strength, because the empire could field overwhelming numbers and varied capabilities. Cavalry, infantry, archers, chariots, engineers, sailors, all combined into a single force. Weakness, because these soldiers spoke different languages, used different tactics, and felt varying levels of loyalty to the distant king. When victory came quick, the diverse army held together. But when campaigns dragged on, when defeats mounted, the cracks began to show. Now we must talk about the Greeks. On the western edge of the empire lay Ionia, the Greek cities of the Aegean coast. These cities had been conquered by Cyrus and incorporated into the empire. They paid their taxes. They provided their ships. They seemed, like all other subjects, content. In 499 BC, they revolted. The Ionian revolt would prove to be the pebble that started an avalanche. The rebels sought help from their cousins in mainland Greece. Athens and Eretria sent ships and soldiers. Together they burned Sardis, the capital of the western satrapies. The revolt was crushed. But Darius did not forget. Athens had dared to interfere in his empire. Athens would be punished. In 490 BC, a Persian force crossed the Aegean and landed at Marathon, just 40 kilometers from Athens. The Athenians, vastly outnumbered, attacked anyway. Against all odds, they won. Marathon was a small battle by Persian standards, but it sent shockwaves through both worlds. For the Greeks, it proved that the invincible Persians could be beaten. For the Persians, it was an insult that demanded response. 10 years later, Darius's son Xerxes returned with the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. He built a bridge of boats across the Hellespont. He cut a canal through a peninsula to avoid sailing around it. And then came Thermopylae, and Salamis, and Plataea. The Greeks won. But let's be clear, the Greeks did not conquer the Persian Empire. They simply defended their homeland. The empire endured. It remained the dominant power of the ancient world for another 150 years. But something had changed. The myth of Persian invincibility was broken, and the seeds of eventual destruction were planted. The Persian Empire did not fall because of external enemies. It fell because of what happened inside. After the Greek wars, a pattern emerged. King after king fell to conspiracy. Brother murdered brother. Mothers poisoned sons. Eunuchs and courtiers accumulated power while the king became a figurehead. Artaxerxes I, Darius II, Artaxerxes II, Artaxerxes III. A parade of rulers, each weaker than the last, each more dependent on court factions. The satrap system that had worked so brilliantly under Darius began to break down. Satraps grew too powerful. They made alliances against the king. They hired Greek mercenaries. They fought private wars. In 366 BC, the great satrap's revolt saw multiple governors rise simultaneously against the king. It was suppressed, but barely. Meanwhile, the treasury was bleeding gold. The constant hiring of Greek mercenaries drained resources. Bribing foreign powers to fight each other became Persian policy. Rather than using their own soldiers, the Persians paid others to do their fighting. This was a sign of decay. When an empire stops believing in itself, when it pays strangers to defend it, the end approaches. And yet, even in decline, the Persian Empire remained formidable. Its wealth was still vast. Its population still numbered in the tens of millions. Its administrative system still functioned. It would take a military genius to bring it down. In 336 BC, a young king took the throne of Macedon. He was 20 years old. His name was Alexander. Within 2 years, Alexander crossed into Asia with 35,000 soldiers. Against him stood the Persian Empire, with its millions of subjects, its vast treasury, its legendary wealth. The numbers seemed absurd. It was like a county declaring war on a continent. But Alexander had something the Persians lacked: purpose. His army was unified. They spoke one language. They followed one king. They believed in one destiny. At Granicus, he smashed a Persian army. At Issus, he faced King Darius III himself. The Persian king fled the battlefield, leaving his mother, wife, and children as captives. At Gaugamela, the decisive battle, Darius brought everything: war chariots with scythes on their wheels, elephants, an army that may have numbered 100,000. Alexander won anyway. This time, Darius fled east, hoping to raise new armies. His own generals murdered him. In 3 years, 200 years of empire ended. So why did the Persian Empire fall? Not because Alexander was unstoppable. He was a remarkable general, but he could have been defeated. At several points, his campaign hung by a thread. The empire fell because of 3 fatal flaws embedded in its very design. First, the system depended too heavily on the king. When the king was strong, wise, and active, the empire flourished. But when the king was weak, the whole structure wobbled. There was no backup, no institution that could function independently. The king was the keystone. Remove him, and the arch collapsed. Darius III was not a coward, but he was not a warrior king. He had spent his life in the court, not the battlefield. When he faced Alexander, a man born to war, he was outmatched. Second, the empire never created loyalty beyond fear and bribery. The satraps served because they profited. The subjects obeyed because resistance was crushed. But no one loved the empire. No one felt that the Persian king was their king. When Alexander arrived, many provinces simply switched allegiance. The Egyptian priests welcomed him as a liberator. The Babylonians opened their gates. For them, one distant king was much like another. Third, the empire had stopped innovating. The satrap system that worked in 500 BC was still in use in 330 BC. The military tactics that Cyrus had developed were still being used by his descendants. Meanwhile, the Greeks had developed the phalanx, a wall of overlapping shields and protruding spears that no Persian force could break. The Persians hired Greek mercenaries, but they never reformed their own military. They never asked, why do the Greeks keep winning? Empires that stop adapting die. The Persian Empire was dead, but its ghost would haunt history. Alexander himself adopted Persian customs. He wore Persian robes. He performed Persian ceremonies. He married a Persian princess. In trying to destroy the empire, he became its heir. When Alexander died, his generals carved up his conquests. But the Seleucid Empire that ruled the East maintained Persian administrative practices. The satrap system continued. The roads were maintained. The tolerance continued. Later, when the Parthians and then the Sassanids created new Persian empires, they looked back to the Achaemenids as their model. The title King of Kings was revived. The imperial traditions continued. And when the Arabs conquered Persia in the 7th century AD, they too adopted Persian administrative systems. The Diwan, the ministerial bureaucracy of the Islamic caliphates, had Persian roots. Even today, the descendants of those ancient Persians celebrate Nowruz, the Persian New Year, the same festival that was celebrated at Persepolis 2,500 years ago. Empires rise, empires fall, but the systems they create, the ideas they pioneer, the precedents they set, these endure. The Persian Empire was history's first true world empire. It pioneered the systems that all later empires would use: provincial governors, royal roads, standardized currency, tolerance for diversity. It lasted over 200 years. It ruled 50 million people. It stretched from Egypt to India. And it fell. Not because its enemies were strong, but because its center was weak. Not because its system was flawed, but because it depended too much on a single man. Not because it lacked resources, but because it lacked the will to adapt. There is a lesson here, for nations, for organizations, for individuals. Success creates systems. Systems create stability. But stability breeds complacency. And complacency creates vulnerability. The greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen fell in 3 years, because it had forgotten how it became great in the first place. This is Cluster Story. Thank you for joining this deep dive into history. If you enjoyed this journey into the Persian Empire, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another episode. Share this with someone who loves history. Until next time, remember, the past is never dead. It echoes in every empire that rises and every empire that falls.